The first book in the Coruscant Nights trilogy by Michael Reaves, Jedi Twilight, was originally scheduled to be released in 2007, so Reaves finished the book and it was edited but not typeset by April of 2007. However, it was ultimately not published until 2008, presumably so that the whole trilogy could be released within the same year. I had never read the Coruscant Nights trilogy before. Somehow it just slipped right below my radar. At that point in time, in 2008, I was pretty selective about what Star Wars books I was reading because I was very busy in my normal life. And perhaps the fact that the Coruscant Nights trilogy did not get audiobook adaptations meant that I just didn't know about these books until fairly recently, and thus am reading them now for the first time. So first, a brief summary. Jax Pavan is one of the few Jedi Knights who survived Order 66, and he has been hiding in the slums of Coruscant ever since. But when his old Jedi Master is killed, Jax is tasked with completing a mission for him, tracking down a droid that has pivotal information for the burgeoning resistance on Coruscant. But Jax will encounter a number of individuals along the way as he attempts to complete this mission, including an old friend of his father's, the droid I-5YQ. So I feel like the back cover blurb of Jedi Twilight is a little misleading. Contrary to what it says, Jax has been hiding out on Coruscant for the past few months, operating as a bounty hunter, and it's after one of his bounties goes awry, he is not paid by Rocco the Hutt, and he uses the Force in a very visible way that he decides that he's gonna get the heck out of Dodge. Unfortunately, the plot has other plans for Jax. His old Jedi Master, Even Peel, is killed at the beginning of the story in a confrontation with stormtroopers. But before he dies, he tells Nick Rostu, who we first met in Shatterpoint by Matthew Stover, and he tells Nick that there's this droid with vital information for the burgeoning resistance on Coruscant called Whiplash. So Nick tracks Jax down, not too soon because he also had to fend off an attack by stormtroopers. And so Jax heads off in search of that droid. He picks up a Jedi colleague, a Twi'lek woman named Laranth Tarak, who is a paladin, a Jedi who doesn't use a lightsaber and only uses blasters. They make an agreement with Rocco the Hutt. That goes awry when Dender and I-5 show up. Dender, of course, was from the Medstar duology. He is a Celestin journalist, and after I-5 got his memory back at the end of Medstar Jedi Healer, they set off to try to track down Lorn Pavan's son. Jax doesn't want anything to do with I-5, but they all are along for the ride. They pick up Nick Rostu, who has been threatened and terrorized by Vader, into finding the location of Jax Pavan. They track down the droid only to find that Prince Xizor of Black Sun is also in search of it. There's a big kerfuffle. The droid is lost. The place where they are is facing imminent destruction, and that's when Vader shows up to confront Jax. So Vader is not confronted here, they get away, and in the process, Jax's group joins forces with Kaird of the Nediji, another character from the Medstar books who's allied with Black Sun, and Vader's former personal aide, an Eloman named Rhinann. And in the very last chapter, they find out, yeah, we lost the droid for Whiplash, but Rhinann tells them that it was a trap anyway, and the droid had no useful knowledge. We'll get to that. So more than anything else, Jedi Twilight seems to be about Jax acquiring his crew that presumably he will be doing missions with in later books. Jax is the son of Lorn Pavan, the Corellian man who was killed at the end of Darth Maul's Shadow Hunter. His father worked for the Jedi Temple, and when Jax showed that he had Force potential, he was taken in by the Jedi, but Lorn lost his job. So Jax was raised in the Jedi Order. He is around the same age as Anakin Skywalker. They were Padawans at the same time. And he never really was looking for his family or seeking them out. So when I-5 shows up claiming to have information about his father and about his past, Jax is not interested. He's not super powerful in the Force, but he does have an interesting skill that I would like to see elaborate on further, which is that he almost sees ties between people and events. It reminded me a little bit of Mace Windu's Shatterpoint ability, but Shatterpoint more seems to be looking at people and events and seeing where they're vulnerable, like where it could break, and Jax's just seems to be more overall connections. Besides struggling with his attitude and his role now as a Jedi on the run, who wants to help people, but also, if he wants to survive, can't really help people. Jax also struggles throughout the book with his ability to touch the Force. He thinks that he's like losing his ability. And I thought this was an interesting thing too, that we haven't often seen where someone's Force ability is waning. Unfortunately though, that's not really what it is here. It's more that Jax cut himself off from the Force so abruptly that when he needs to touch the Force, he's having trouble doing so. So it's not that he's losing his Force ability, more that in being in hiding, it's harder for him to access it now. And I do definitely like the idea of the former more than the latter. As the book ends, instead of wanting to run away and hide, Jax is willing to stay on Coruscant, willing to try to help others, sort of stepping back up to the Jedi role that he had pretty much relinquished in the beginning of the novel. Jax has some interesting traits, but he's not my favorite protagonist, but I'll save that more for the issues bit. Jax's partner that he works with here is the Twi'lek Jedi Laranth. Laranth is like a paladin, which I thought was an interesting term to use because I was more familiar with the Dungeons and Dragons sense, where paladins definitely have a religious aspect to their role, that they're warriors, but they're warriors serving some sort of divine being. And I feel like maybe that wasn't the best choice of word to use for Laranth here, because she's more a Jedi who fights differently. She doesn't use a lightsaber and instead is highly skilled in blasters, which I thought was an interesting choice. I could see the reality of there being Jedis who maybe don't want to use any weapons, who, yes, don't use lightsabers, but like don't use anything at all, just immerse themselves in the Force that way. But that's not Laranth. She doesn't use a lightsaber, but she still uses weapons, and in fact she's so highly skilled with her blasters that she can shoot projectiles out of the air, that she can deflect blaster shots coming at them. This is not a type of character that we've ever seen before in any of the books, which may be why it like caught me so off guard, because I was like, wait, what? So I'm really not sure how Laranth's role as Paladin fits within like the Jedi Order at that time. She sounds like a renegade group of Jedi, like a, I don't know, Callista's master, not someone who would have been on Coruscant proper. But her skills are very interesting, and I feel like she embodies the role of a Jedi much more than Jax does, at least for like the first half of the novel. And she definitely seems like a good person to have by your side, even if I still take quibbles with the fact that she's a Jedi paladin. There's another Force sensitive in their group, Nick Rostu, who after the events of Shatterpoint, he survived. He became an officer during the Clone Wars, and when the Emperor took over and it suddenly went from the Republic to the Empire, he said no thanks and joined Whiplash and has been working with them ever since. He has a little bit of Force ability, but not anything trained, and it seems to be more that he can sense things, he can sense people, but that's really it. Nick is captured by Vader. Vader threatens to destroy his people, his family, if he doesn't help him track down Jax. So for most of the book, Nick is a very reluctant double agent. He's wounded during the fight against Xizor. They're able to get him out. And I appreciated that no one blamed Nick for what happened, that pretty much everyone was like, yeah, if confronted with Vader, I don't know what I would do. Jax's group run into the Celestin journalist Dhur and the droid I-5 because after the end of the events on Drongar, Dhur and I-5 have been trying to track down Lorne's son. And Dhur's feeling sort of conflicted about this, because on the one hand, he wants to help his buddy I-5 achieve his quest, but he also feels sort of jealous, like his role as I-5's pal is going to be taken over by Jax. I liked, again, getting to check in on Dhur, seeing our quippy buddy, but he also is like, isn't really useful here. And I think part of that is because a lot of what happened in the Medstar duology was because of Dhur's role as a journalist. And here he's not working as a journalist at all, and in fact seems to be a liability to a lot of this stuff because, like, he's not a fighter, he's a writer. But I'm glad he was able to work it out with I-5 in the end, and they're presumably back to being best buds because he's not going to be usurped by Jax. I-5 remains the most interesting of the characters that Michael Reaves has created. Like 3PO, like R2-D2, I-5 is a droid who seems to have achieved sentience. Like, he is a character in and of himself. And it's not just his intelligence and his sarcasm, but the way that he seems to have actual emotions, that when he finds Jax and he's like, Jax Pavan, I knew your father. I want to tell you about your father. And Jax is like, no thanks, droid. You can tell that it obviously hurts I-5, that he's finally achieved his quest only to find that Lorne's son has no interest in learning anything that I-5 has to offer him. I-5 gets them out of a lot of difficult situations too, so I feel like of anyone in this group, like, I would choose I-5. I want I-5 on my side. Of course, Jax and co are not the only people looking for this bug-eyed droid that supposedly has vital information for Whiplash. Black Sun are also looking for this droid, in particular Prince Xizor. This is before we meet him in Shadows of the Empire by Steve Perry, so he is not the head of all Black Sun at this point. He's not even a Vigo at this point, although he's definitely aiming there. I complained a little bit about Xizor's abilities and how much he was hyped up to be really, really great in Shadows of the Empire, and then felt like he was more a bored rich boy. But I feel like he comes across as a bit more competent here. Kaird of the Nediji, who we first met in the Medstar duology, he is tasked by the current Underlord to kill Xizor, because Xizor is obviously aiming for the top. And he's not able to. Xizor captures him. Xizor is very skilled in fighting, and we also see something that will come to play in Shadows of the Empire as well, which is that Xizor is already working on human replica droids. He's a surprisingly able foe, and in typical Black Sun fashion, he gets away at the end of the book. I feel less sure why Kaird of the Nediji is here, though, other than just telling us what happened to him after the end of the Medstar duology. So he's back here, he's working for Black Sun, he just wants to get enough information and money so that he can go home to his home world. And in fact, after being captured by Xizor and dragged around everywhere, he joins up with Jax's group in the end and is like, here, I'll give you all my money, I just want to go home. And I'm like, okay, thank you, Kaird. Why were you even here? And of course, Vader is the one who presumably started this rumor about the bug-eyed droid in the first place. He wants Jax Pavan. I mean, I guess we can guess why, because we know that Vader is Anakin Skywalker, and Anakin Skywalker was friends with Jax Pavan. Maybe that's why. The characters, not knowing that connection, are like, oh, I guess he just wants Jax because he wants to kill Jedi. Vader is served by this Elomin alien aide, Rhinann, who doesn't like humans, thinks very highly of himself, but is absolutely terrified of Vader. And in fact, in the end, when Vader comes to confront Jax, but the reactor's gonna blow, Rhiannon uses that as an opportunity to get out of Vader's Lambda shuttle and joins forces with Jax, and then is the one that tells him, like, yeah, that droid didn't have any useful information anyway. Which is good, because they lost the droid because it fell further into the factory and was destroyed by feral droids. And I guess that's, for me, issue number 1 with Jedi Twilight. It felt like the first book in the Coruscant Nights trilogy was just plot excuses to acquire Jax's crew. Like, we're gonna introduce you to everyone, we're gonna get the group all joined up by the end, but the thing they were searching for is, like, nothing. At first, when it was like, oh, Even Peel died to let you know about this droid that has vital information for Whiplash, I was like, this is very Shades of A New Hope, isn't it? Of course, that's a little sidestepped by the fact that the droid has no useful information and that no one gets the information from the droid in the end. But then it just felt like, well, what's the point of this? What's the point of searching desperately for this droid if it's not useful? What did Even Peel die for if his information is worthless? Again, it just felt like an excuse to get this whole gang together so that they could do more stuff in books 2 and 3. Which, like, fair enough. Most times book number 1 in a trilogy is setup. I just didn't expect it to be such overt setup at times. My second issue with Coruscant Nights is that I love all the different lore and continuity that Michael Reaves pulls into his books, but at times it felt like what was being used here didn't work. For instance, Dhur is constantly making jokes about Nogri, but I thought the whole point of the Nogri was that no one really knew they existed. They were like a very minor planet destroyed during the Clone Wars, so that when Darth Vader became their lord that they send troops to, they were very much stealth troops, and like, people don't know about the Nogri commandos. So the fact that Dhur is constantly joking about Nogri, every time it happens, it pulls me out of the story. Another example is Nick Rostu is playing this strategy game in a bar, and he's playing it against a Yevotha. But again, I felt like for the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy to work, which is set years after Return of the Jedi, you can't really know anything about the Yevotha. They need to be an unknown alien species, not just to you, the reader, but to the galaxy at large. Because I don't think Leia would have ever tried to negotiate with them in the way she did if she knew what violent, blood-obsessed maniacs they were. And so I think to have Nick play the strategy game against a Yevotha and then a Yevotha try to kill him with his dew claw doesn't work for like where we are in the timeline. But I think my biggest issue with Coruscant Nights is that I don't like Jax Pavan. I know that protagonists change and develop and grow, but if this is our introduction to him in book number 1, while I appreciate that in the very last chapter, in chapter 46, he's like, I'm a Jedi and I gotta help people and I can't run away from my duties. That's fine. I agree with that. But we've got like 45 other chapters where Jax just comes off as a jerk. He's not behaving like a Jedi. He is rude to people. He's especially rude to my boy I-5, who does not deserve that. He's a Jedi Knight, so you'd expect him to be a leader, but he's not a very good leader. The point is that by the time you get to the end, you see how now Jax is finally willing to step up and actually be a Jedi. But I didn't want to read about that. I didn't want to read about a Jedi who is rude. I don't care about helping people. I just care about myself. And I'm like, fine. But as the protagonist, I am not rooting for you, dude. Your father thus far was far superior to you. You better step up in books 2 or 3. I'm gonna be annoyed. So, in short, Jedi Twilight starts off the Coruscant Nights trilogy with a search plot that ends up going nowhere because the thing they're searching for is worthless. But in the process, Jax has acquired a crew that presumably will assist him in the next 2 books. I was very happy to see one of my favorite droids, I-5, return in this book, and he has a very emotional plot line here. Unfortunately, I wish that the object of his emotions, Jax Pavan, was not such a ugh, dude. And I felt like there were maybe too many cameos from past Reeves stories here, because, like, in the end, why is Kaird of the Nediji even here? And while it's cool to be in the underworld of Coruscant, and I think some aspects of it were well done, like, the feral droids are pretty scary in the end, I also think that Michael Reaves did this somewhat better in Darth Maul Shadowhunter. So in the end, I feel like Jedi Twilight was an okay start to the Coruscant Nights trilogy, but it didn't wow me. So next time I'm going to be reading the novelization of the Clone Wars movie, The Clone Wars by Karen Traviss.